On October 30th, Russian units continued offensive operations along the Kupiansk-Svatove-Kreminna line, making some progress. Information from that day suggests that these troops approached the town of Torsky, located approximately 8 kilometers southwest of Kreminna. The Ukrainian General Staff reported unsuccessful attempts to attack Russian forces in the areas near Sinkovka, 7 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, Ivanivka, 20 kilometers southwest of Kupiansk, and in the vicinity of Terna, 15 kilometers northwest of Kremenaya. Ivan Shevstov, spokesman for the Ukrainian unit Steel Cordon, indicated that the greatest enemy activity is observed in the vicinity of Sinkovka and Ivanivka. Russian soldiers carry out attacks there in small groups of 10 to 30 people. Shevstov emphasized that the Russians are trying to take control of the left bank of the Oskil River. Russian sources inform about the movements of their troops, including airborne units, towards Kupiansk and Kremenaya. Ramzan Kadyrov, the leader of Chechnya, published footage that purported to show Chechen special units Bakhmut attacking Ukrainian positions in the Serebryanska forest, southwest of Kremenaya. On the other hand, Russian sources emphasized that Ukrainian forces attempted a counterattack in the Kupianska-Svatove-Kreminna area on October 30th, achieving modest successes. One Russian military blogger reported that the Ukrainians had regained some positions near Ryhorodka, 12 kilometers west of Svatove. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed that their troops repelled several Ukrainian attacks in the Kupiansk and Kreminna areas. On October 31st, the Japanese Ministry of Defense reported the violation of its airspace over the island of Hokkaido by a helicopter most likely belonging to Russia. In response to this violation, the Japan Air Self-Defense Force deployed its fighter jets to intervene. The Kyoto news agency reported that Japanese authorities conveyed a strong protest to Russia over the incident through diplomatic channels. This indicates tense relations between Japan and Russia, which have their origins in both countries' difficult history and close proximity. The island of Hokkaido is only 40 kilometers away from the Russian island of Sakhalin at the shortest point between them. There is also an unresolved territorial conflict over the archipelago, which is called the Japanese Northern Territories in Japan and the Kuril Islands in Russia. These territories have been occupied by Russia since the end of World War II in 1945. Negotiations on the status of these islands were interrupted by Russia after Japan imposed sanctions in response to Russia's full-scale hostility. Nevertheless, Japan supported Ukraine with a variety of aid, including military equipment, medical support, and assistance in rebuilding the agricultural sector. According to data from the Ukrainian Ministry of Finance from August 1st, 23, the value of aid that Japan provided to Ukraine exceeded $7.5 billion. On October 30th, Ukrainian forces were reported to have continued their offensive operations towards the town of Bakhmut and recorded some successes. Published geolocation data from that day suggests that Ukrainian troops moved their positions northeast of the town of Kurdiumivka, which lies 10 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut. Official sources from the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed that Ukrainian units carried out offensive operations south of Bakhmut, inflicting losses on the enemy. Some Russian military commentators have suggested that attempts by Ukrainian forces to cross the railway line between Klishchevka, 6 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut, and Andriivka, 8 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut, were unsuccessful. Another commentator claimed that the Ukrainians managed to cross the mentioned railway line south of Andriivka and secure new positions. In turn, Russian forces, despite their ground attacks near Bakhmut on the same day, made no significant progress. The Ukrainian General Staff reported on unsuccessful Russian attempts to regain lost positions in the Andriivka and Klishchevka areas. Colonel General Oleksandr Siersky, commander of the Ukrainian land forces, emphasized that the Russians had significantly strengthened their forces in the Bakhmut area, moving from defensive to more aggressive actions. According to Russian mill bloggers, positional fighting took place northwest of Bakhmut, in the vicinity of Berkhovka on the northwestern outskirts of Bakhmut, Vasyukivka, 12 kilometers north of Bakhmut, and Orychovo-Vasilivka, 10 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut. On October 31st, according to information provided by Bloomberg, the European Union is considering introducing the 12th series of restrictions against Russia, the scope of which would cover transactions worth $5.3 billion. The planned sanctions package would aim to restrict the export of certain products, such as welding machines, chemicals, and various technologies that may be used for military purposes. In addition, this set of sanctions also plan to introduce restrictions on software licensing, imports of certain certain processed metals, aluminum products, construction components, transport-related goods, and diamonds. The main intention of these sanctions is to limit Russia's ability to circumvent restrictions already in force by cooperating with third countries. Although the export of certain technologies to Russia is prohibited, Western technologies are still used in the production of Russian military equipment. Often, these technologies reach Russian or Iranian factories through countries such as Kyrgyzstan or Turkey. The new sanctions would also aim to eliminate loopholes in the regulations regarding the illegal transit of Russian oil. Even though there is a price cap of $60 per barrel for Russian oil, Russia has found ways to circumvent it by using a shadow fleet of many ships. While the U.S. Treasury has already implemented sanctions against companies violating this price cap, the proposed measures demonstrate the need for further action. The planned set of sanctions would include adding over 100 people and nearly 50 entities to the sanctions list. The European Union announced its earlier round of sanctions in June 2013, which also aimed to tighten existing restrictions, especially on goods and technologies that could support Russia's military-industrial sector. It is important that, in the event of sanctions, the unanimous consent of all EU member states be obtained. In this context, Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó stated on October 28 that Hungary would oppose any new sanctions on key sectors of the Russian economy, such as gas, oil, and nuclear energy. Despite previous veto threats from Hungary, the country ultimately agreed to implement all 11 previous sanctions packages, often after receiving some concessions. On October 30th, Ukrainian forces took no combat initiatives and no ground attacks were confirmed west or southwest of Donetsk. On the same day, Russian forces conducted ground operations west and southwest of the city of Donetsk, but no decisive advances were reported. According to information from the Ukrainian General Staff, Russian attacks in the vicinity of Marinka, Novomikhailivka, 20 kilometers southwest of Donetsk, and south of Vuhledar, 25 kilometers southwest of Donetsk, did not bring the expected results for the Russians. Russian sources, however, suggested that their forces made little progress in the Novomikhailivka area. A Russian military commentator focused attention on the activities of the 39th Motor Rifle Brigade, belonging to the 68th Army Corps Eastern Military District in the vicinity of Novomikhailivka. On October 31st, the spokesman of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, Andriivka, informed the media that Russia appeared to be withdrawing all its troops from Belarus. Although branches were removed through a rotational process, no new ones were introduced to replace them. Despite this, some Russian troops still remain in Belarus, but they are mainly focused on personnel responsible for operating Russian military equipment in the country, Demchenko noted. Border services are closely monitoring the situation in this region, and the state of the border is completely stable. There is no evidence that military personnel or equipment were moved towards Ukraine. Currently, as Demchenko emphasized, there are less than 1,000 Russian mercenaries in Belarus, specifically members of the Wagner Group. They came to conduct training for the Belarusian army in the summer of 1023. Their presence in Belarus was the result of an agreement concluded after the short-lived rebellion of the group's founder, Yevgeny Prigozhin, against the authorities in Moscow in June. The founder of this group, Prigozhin, died on August 23rd in a plane crash in the Tver region of Russia, in circumstances that remain unclear. Information provided by the National Resistance Center of Ukraine shows that mercenaries from the Wagner Group, who probably left Belarus due to low salaries, began to leave the country en masse after receiving the news of Prigozhin's death. According to the Ukrainian army, at one point there were nearly 8,000 fighters from the Wagner Group stationed in Belarus. Of this number, approximately 500 returned to the country to take part in fighting in Ukraine. During the ongoing occupation, the authorities carried out forced evacuation of Ukrainians to Russia and their forced mobilization. On October 30th, Leonid Paseknik, responsible for the occupied part of the Luhansk Oblast, confirmed that in recent days, 270 people, including 169 children, had been sent to Sochi in the Krasnodar Krai under the pretext of improving their health and taking their minds off the conflict. Over the weekend before this news, another group of residents, possibly including children, were also transported to Sochi. Additionally, on October 29th, the Occupation Administration of Kherson Oblast announced that 1,400 students of local universities would be transported to Russia to visit monuments and places of military glory as part of the More Than a Tour program. Also, on October 30th, the Ukrainian Resistance Center reported on attempts by the Russian authorities to employ soldiers who had completed their military service in the occupied regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. Emerging problems with crime and inappropriate behavior on the part of demobilized Russian soldiers prompted local authorities to create a database of potential employers for these veterans. Moreover, Russia announced plans to modernize checkpoints on its border with occupied Ukraine. On October 25th, the Russian Ministry of Transport announced the implementation of autonomous vehicle detection systems at 10 border crossings with occupied Ukraine. These systems collect data about vehicles and send them to the central control point of the Ministry of Transport in Russia. They are also intended to monitor waiting times at various crossings and provide updates on a publicly accessible website. Although the new system is touted as a tool to facilitate border crossings, it also serves as a means of monitoring and collecting information on the Ukrainian civilian population. The reaction of the artistic community and state institutions in Ukraine was full of astonishment in response to the news that the European Union delegation to Russia was organizing a European Film Festival this year. This event takes place despite the cancellation of the previous year's edition due to Russian military operations on Ukrainian territory. According to the information available on the festival's website, the online event is scheduled from November 1st to November 15th and is titled Cinema Unites. The film offer includes over 20 productions from various parts of Europe from the years between 1960 and 1922, as well as several films created in cooperation between Russia and EU member states. The Ukrainian Ministry of Culture, in a statement dated October 28th, emphasized the importance of consistent application of sanctions, not only in the economic but also in the cultural area. It was noted that renewing cultural dialogue after 612 days of the conflict, which led to the destruction of over 1,700 Ukrainian cultural monuments, is unacceptable. The European Union ambassador to Russia, Roland Galhareg, emphasized on the festival's website that Russian culture is an integral part of Europe's cultural heritage. He also noted that despite adversities and physical barriers, film is a medium capable of overcoming all barriers. He drew attention to how Russian cultural heritage has long fascinated and inspired the world. The reaction of the Ukrainian State Film Agency was equally strong. It stressed that art and politics cannot be separated in the context of the destruction of Ukrainian cultural sites by Russian military operations. In a statement on October 28, the agency emphasized that a complete cultural shutdown was a key step on the road to victory. The Ukrainian Institute also called for unity and consistency from the entire European community, calling for the cancellation of the event.